guys, good afternoon. How are you doing today?
Good.
Yeah? Awesome. So before we get started, I have to finish taking attendance. So I want you guys to talk to your partners, share something really good that's happened today, maybe something not so good, or something you're looking forward to this weekend, okay? So I'll give you guys 30 seconds when we finish up attendance.
No, I did all
That's a
that.
good thing. Because they slim.
Yeah.
For Pete.
I did it one game.
Yes.
That's what I did freshman.
Yeah. Does anybody want to share anything exciting that's happened this week?
I'm
Yes.
getting my braces taken off today.
Congratulations. I remember that day. That's a huge day. That's awesome. All right, so yesterday we talked about President Kennedy because we're still in the Cold War unit. So today we're kind of shifting. We're going to shift into a mini unit called the Civil Rights Movement. So before we get started, there's a couple of things I just want to say. The Civil Rights Movement wasn't entirely about desegregation. There were other smaller movements happening at the same time. Today, though, we're really going to focus on the movement involving desegregation and I want to review the history with you guys because some of this stuff we're going to talk about, you should remember from last semester. But if not, it's okay, it's a refresher and it will help prime you for what we're going to talk about. So, I want you guys to talk to your partners. What are civil rights? You've got 30 seconds, and if your partner's not here, I'll talk to that other person. So go ahead and go. What are civil rights?
Rights that protect individuals.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think they should be equal rights? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do you guys want to share what you talked about? What are civil rights? What do you think those are? Do you have a right to vote when you turn 18?
Yes.
Okay, so is that a civil right?
Yes.
Okay. What does the First Amendment of the Constitution say? Freedom of speech, and what's the other big one in there? Freedom of religion and beliefs, and the right to peacefully protest. Okay, so remember that, because that's something huge we're going to touch upon when we get to Dr. King, okay? So I think I have a few more questions. All right, so equal rights for all. Civil rights are the rights of individuals to receive equal treatment and to be free from unfair treatment or discrimination. Okay? So I want you guys to talk to your partners. Can you think of other movements for equal rights that we've talked about in this class specifically this particular school year? Okay, so go ahead and talk to your partners. You've got 30 seconds.
The women's suffrage movement.
What's kind of movements in that school?
Wasn't there
Yeah.
one?
Yes, we're going to talk about that next week.
What about those one morning when you turned
Like,
18 and you used to
Pacific
say
Generation
you
War.
go?
Is that where?
Yeah, so we're going to suffrage movement.
Oh,
Okay, so what did you guys come up with? What are some examples?
The women's suffrage movement.
The women's suffrage movement, and that's actually really important to what we're going to be talking about because there's more of the civil rights movement and the equal rights movement that involves women because we were not treated the same under the eyes of the law as men were. So we're going to see that come to a head in the 60s. So I really want you to put your thinking caps on. What was the amendment to the Constitution that abolished slavery? Do you remember what year that was?
1960.
Close. Do you remember what number it was? These are the 3 Reconstruction Amendments, and it's okay if you don't remember. Oh, I heard it. Who said it? 13th Amendment, okay? All right. I want you guys to talk to your partners. Were former slaves given the same rights and access to institutions as whites? You got 30 seconds. Go ahead and talk about it.
They had like the separate but equal thing, but they wouldn't really actually
All right, so last question. Who was allowed to vote at the end of the Civil War? Talk to your partners. Who was actually allowed to vote in the United States at the end of the Civil War?
Like the participants, something like that.
Are you sure that with, are you comfortable sharing that out?
Yeah.
Yes, okay. All right, so does anyone want to answer this one?
I know that like rich white men were allowed to vote, and like they did like the thing for blacks where if like their grandfather like was in the war, the blacks could vote.
Yeah, that's what they called the grandfather clause that they created, was that if certain people had fought, then their descendants would get to vote after that. So let's go into, so just a reminder, Reconstruction era Civil Rights Amendments. 13th Amendment abolished slavery in 1865. You were so close. Okay, the 14th Amendment provided citizenship and equal protection under the law in 1868. The 15th Amendment provided the right to vote for all men in 1870, not women, okay? Do you guys have any questions about those three, or this is all just refresher? Okay. All right, so on the handouts at your desks, you guys can go ahead and each grab one. As we go through this lesson, I want you guys to fill in the definitions, okay? It also says on there to write a sentence using it. I think I've got it. All right, so the first term I want you guys to get familiar with, and some of these you may already know, and that's fine. What I'm trying to do is I want all of us to work from the same definition so that we're all on the same page, because part of what you're going to be doing next week is creating civil rights presentations. So I want to make certain that we have this language down. So Jim Crow laws, this was the system of racial segregation in the South. So what you can write down is Jim Crow laws separated blacks from whites in all aspects of public life. So Jim Crow laws separated blacks from whites in all aspects of life. And I'm sorry I'm bouncing around, but the clicker doesn't work. So I'm having to use this keyboard. Okay, so you don't have to write any of this down. Just a refresher on Jim Crow laws, because we did talk about this, gosh, was it before Thanksgiving last year, I think? So Jim Crow laws racially segregated the South. That was post-Reconstruction to 1964. This is the period that we're talking about. Is we're talking about basically the middle of the 50s leading up to the mid-60s is the Civil Rights era. So just a refresher, the civil court case Plessy v. Ferguson upheld Jim Crow, saying that separate but equal. In reality, were blacks separate but equal to whites during this period? No, they weren't. So Plessy versus Ferguson is an important court case. All right, I want you guys to talk to your partners. What is going on in this photo? What's happening here? So you got 30 seconds, go ahead and start. Do you notice anything else about the photo? Yeah. All right, so what did you notice the difference between the two sinks? Was that something you guys talked about? So the white sink is larger, it's much nicer. This one is probably really old and original to the building, so they decided to give that to have blacks use this, and whites got to use the nicer sink. However, they're not that far separated, but this is kind of what they were doing in public spaces at this point, especially in the South. All right, what does this sign mean to you guys? I want you guys to talk to your partners. What is this sign telling you? And how do you feel about it? So what is this sign telling you?
It's telling me that they're comparing them to dogs.
So in this period, when I use the phrase blacks, I should probably say persons of color because Mexicans were absolutely lumped in to this category. If you were not white or presented white in this period, you were faced with segregation. And absolutely, that is what the sign is saying. They're equating Negroes and Mexicans with dogs, which we all know how that ended up. Okay, so segregation impacted all aspects of public spaces. There were separate restrooms, like we saw with the sinks, separate jobs, separate seats on public transportation, and this was widespread throughout the American South, okay? So this picture shows you help wanted, white only. This map is kind of showing you, this is actually part of the Midwest as well, if you count Arkansas and Iowa and a few other states. So this is a black neighborhood, and again, here's more of those restroom signs. What do you think happens if someone of color is looking for a restroom and it says whites only? Where are they supposed to go? Outside. All right, so next two terms on your vocabulary, we've got prejudice, which is an unfair feeling of dislike for a person or a group based on race, sex, religion, okay? So it's an unfair feeling or dislike. And then for oppression, we have to treat a person or group of people in a cruel or unfair way. Okay. So oppression is to treat a group or a person in a cruel or unfair way. Give you guys a second to write that down. So there's a video in particular we're gonna watch next week, a short one, this documentary, Soundtrack for Revolution, and they talk about both of these terms throughout. Okay, does anybody know off the top of your head, I was gonna have you partner discuss, but this one, do you know what this word disenfranchisement means? Have you heard of it before?
I know the franchise is.
What's a franchise?
It's like McDonald's and
That's right. That's really good. Normally, I would say yes, that's close, but this particular word, it's a really large word, meaning to take away the right to vote, okay? So part of what all of these Jim Crow and segregation laws were trying to do was disenfranchise African Americans from voting. So definition is the state of being deprived of a right or privilege, especially the right to vote, okay? Is disenfranchisement on your vocab? I don't think it is. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted you guys to get familiar with this because there's a lot happening right now in the country, in certain states within the South, where they're starting to enact laws again that put up barriers for people to vote. That's called disenfranchisement. So some of the same things that happened in this period are repeating themselves again right now. All right, so some of the tactics, you guys don't have to write any of this down, I just want to talk about it really quickly. Poll taxes, most blacks were poor, so poll taxes were put in place so that they could not vote, okay? They also put in literacy tests, which required them to pass a test in order to vote. What they did is they made two different kinds of tests so that poor whites could still pass the test, but then they made a more difficult test for blacks and persons of color. Property requirements were taken out of the equation because some poor whites do not own property either. So the grandfather clauses, which we talked about, individuals became exempt to poll taxes, literacy tests, and property requirements if their grandfather voted in the election of 1860, which was the last one before the Civil War broke out. So, like I had said about some of those states that are starting to pass laws right now, they're all mentioned up here. So Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. Of these, the worst offenders are Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana, and North Carolina. So Alabama had all four: grandfather clause, the property test, the literacy test, and the poll tax. So they had the most obstacles set up to prevent African Americans from voting. Georgia was very similar. They had the first three. Did any of you, have you heard of the woman named Stacey Abrams? Okay, well, she was running for governor in Georgia. She actually got more people to register to vote in the state of Georgia this last election. These are people that for generations their family never voted because they were used to this kind of obstacles in their way. So this is just kind of gives you an idea. All of these states are the same states that are starting to put more obstacles back up to keep people from voting. All right, I want you to talk to your partners. What does the word lynching mean? All right, you got 30 seconds. Go ahead. You guys can switch lines. That was a really good point. Do you want to share it with the whole class? Or you feel like it?
I don't even know how to explain it. I could try.
Okay, go ahead. Give it a shot because you were on the right track. So what does lynching mean?
I think lynching means like to beat up or like to kill someone without like authorities there.
Yes. Yes. It's basically, it's violence that's been perpetrated by a group that has no authority to do so. Do you mind sharing what you two were talking about?
We're talking about Emmett Till and they just like killed him for no reason.
Yeah, so Emmett Till was, it's a young teenager who, he was killed, lynched. We're gonna talk about him more in a few days, but yes, he is a good example of lynching, and the reason I wanted you to share that with everyone is Emmett Till is an important figure in the entire civil rights movement, because it was actually his death that put a lot of events in motion that created the civil rights movement itself. So, lynching, I think this is on your vocab sheet. So, is an informal punishment enforced by a group who did not have the legal authority to do so. Okay, so lynching is an informal punishment enforced by a group who did not have the legal authority to do so. In many cases, lynching occurs when a group believes a person has committed a crime even though they were not convicted or tried for that crime. Okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Check Google Classroom when you get home. Just this top part, informal punishment enforced by a group. Now, sometimes in that group, it could be a cop, it could be a judge, it could have been people in law enforcement, but they were not acting as law enforcement when this happened. So one of the groups that terrorized African Americans and persons of color in this period were the Ku Klux Klan. Lynching was definitely a method that they used. The Ku Klux Klan also attacked Catholics, they attacked Jews and other minority groups. They very much believed in society should look a certain way and act a certain way, and if you didn't fit into that mold, then you would become a target of theirs. So, Equal Justice Initiative. In Google Classroom, I have these two links for you guys. I'll let you guys explore that when we're done. This is a map that they have, but they also have an interactive version. But if you look at this map, these are all the lynchings that have occurred in the United States since 1877 to 1950. FYI, we still have lynchings happening today, but this map only goes to 1950. The one online goes all the way to current. But if you look, you can see all of these are concentrated in the South. The lynchings that had occurred in California, those were Mexicans that were lynched. So California is not exempt from lynchings during this period. All right, I want you guys to talk to your partners. Who do you think integrated first, American sports or or the American military? You got 30 seconds. What do you guys think? Sports or military? So I got military in the first part. Sports, military. Yes, what do you don't know? Do you want to even take an educated guess?
I'll go with military.
Military? Okay, let's do it this way. Show of hands. Who thinks the military was desegregated first? 3? Okay. Show of hands who thinks it was sports that was desegregated first. Those on the fence? Okay. It was actually sports. Sports. And this is something you guys are going to see throughout history. Popular culture tends to dictate what's going to happen next. And popular culture was saying it was time to desegregate sports. So Jackie Robinson was the first major league player, black major league player, 1947, although he plays for the Dodgers, he did. I'm a Giants fan, but that's okay. Earl Lloyd was the first black NBA player in 1950, and eventually all sports became integrated. The military wasn't desegregated until the following year. President Truman's the one that ended military segregation, and the reason he did it is because he looked at the troops after World War II. Everyone's contributions were equal. Persons of color that served in the military were the exact same as white men. So he decided at that point it's time to get rid of segregation in the military. So it was sports and the military that started it. All right, let's do some key terms really quick. Freedom rides. You don't have to write this full definition. You can just say they were interracial bus trips through the American South. Basically, they were protesting segregation on those buses. Sit-ins were a nonviolent protest tactic where persons of color would sit at a whites-only lunch counter. And then civil disobedience is disobeying certain laws in nonviolent ways in order to make a point. And the reason I'm bringing out these nonviolent key terms is because this period is marked by extreme violence. However, it was not both sides being violent. Dr. King very much promoted nonviolent peaceful protesting, and his followers did not engage in violent acts. There were other people fighting on the same side as Dr. King who believed in violence, but Dr. King and his supporters did not, which is one of the reasons why he was so appealing to the entire American public. Okay, and the last one we have on here, which is another form of nonviolent peaceful protesting, is boycotting, which is to refuse to buy something or take part in something as a way of protesting. So if you guys, I'm trying to think what you might have boycotted. Trying to think of something recently where you would stop buying a certain brand. Have you ever done that where you found out something about a company and you said, nope, I'm not gonna buy that anymore because of the way they treat their workers? I don't know, I'm trying to think. Okay, so you guys have all those? Yeah. All right, so what we're gonna talk about tomorrow, we're gonna talk about Emmett Till. We're gonna talk about Brown versus Board of Education, which that's the court case, bless you, that overruled Plessy versus Ferguson. We're gonna take a look at Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, and then you guys are gonna pick a song, and you're gonna analyze that song from the Civil Rights Movement. So for now, go ahead, you can take your Chromebooks out. We're gonna work on your exit tickets in Google Classroom. If you don't have a Chromebook and need the exit ticket on paper, just raise your hand and I will come around and drop that off. And then what I'll do for you guys is I'll pull up the website. So for those of you that have paper, if you're watching the screen, I'll do it again. What it's showing you is where the lynchings and the terror violence were in this area, and how during the Great Migration, when African Americans left the South and moved outward, you can see where they moved to. So here it is again. So they went, there was a dark concentration of all of them in the South, and these states in particular, South Carolina, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, they left there and spread outward, and that's where a lot of them came to California. Because they were trying to escape that violence.
Rufus Masora would
Oops. So Mississippi by far had the most lynchings of all of the states in the South. We had 656 reported lynchings in their history. So Mississippi is definitely a place that they wanted to leave. Do you guys have any questions about anything that we went over today at all? If you don't, it's okay. I will see everything in your exit tickets, and we can talk about it tomorrow. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap things up for the day, because the bell's gonna ring in a few minutes. So thank you guys for being so wonderful. So again, tomorrow we're gonna talk about Emmett Till, we're gonna talk about the Brown v. Board of Education, and we're gonna get ready to prep for your big civil rights projects, okay? So you guys were fantastic, thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow. You guys are the best, thank you. Y'all are getting extra credit out of this, by the way. I gotta make sure I take